The launch about to happen is for a title published by HarperCollins India, but it was originally commissioned in Australia by a company called Hardy Grant Books. The title is Walking Towards Ourselves, Indian Women Tell Their Stories. I am the editor of that book. Thank you. For those of you who haven't seen the book, I'm going to read you the blurb. It will give you an insight into what the book is about. And then we have 10 of the contributors with us today. 4 of them are going to give a quick sample reading, and we'll have a quick discussion as well. Walking Towards Ourselves, Indian Women Tell Their Stories. From the film sets of Bollywood to a closeted marital home in a Tamil Nadu village, from the slick boardroom of an online dating app to a makeshift bamboo house in post-cyclone Sundarbans, from the rigors of a beauty parlor to a home for abandoned girls in Karnataka, walk with them. Walk with them as they report from Mumbai's streets alone at night, as they grapple with domestic violence, as they search for love through marriage brokers, as they learn to speak their minds, as they lay claim to their bodies, as they choose to be partnered or not, to become mothers or not, to make art, to make love, to make meaning of their lives. Reaching across different strata of society, religion, and language, this anthology creates a kaleidoscope of distinct and varied real-life stories, told with startling honesty, piercing insight, moments of poetry, and flashes of humor. Walking Towards Ourselves is a timely exploration of what it means to be a woman in India in a time of intense and incredible change. First off, I'd like to invite to the stage Mealy Zorkia. She's from Hardy Grant Books in Australia, and she is actually the person who commissioned this book in its early incarnation. Now, Mealy told me recently, although we know each other well, that her name is Shah Mealy, which means shy. However, she has agreed to speak today.
Everywhere I go in India, I keep getting told, "You look like Indian." But contrary to appearances, I'm not in fact Indian. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, and this is my first time in India. So why then, you might ask, would someone who lives on the other side of the world, who's never been to India, want to commission a book of Indian women's writing? And why would Hardy Grant Books, the company I work for in Melbourne, Australia, want to champion an anthology of Indian women's writing? Last summer, I was reading a fantastic book by an Indian Booker Prize winning author, and it suddenly struck me that despite the rich literary heritage of India, the primary sources of Indian literature that we're exposed to in Australia are mainly from men. Aside from a handful of international award-winning authors, we didn't hear any other Indian women's voices. So where were they? I approached Catriona with the intention of creating an anthology that would address this gap in Australian publishing and showcase the manifold talents of Indian women writers. But when we began to discuss what form this anthology should take, whether it should be fiction, poetry, non-fiction, we couldn't get away from the message that we kept hearing in the international media, that India is one of the most dangerous places on the planet to be a woman. All we were hearing in relation to women and India was negative press designed to sell newspapers. But we weren't hearing from the women themselves. Outside of the headlines, we weren't hearing of their real lived experiences. And so we decided that we should create a collection of narrative non-fiction writing, mini memoirs, real stories that would not only showcase the talents of Indian women writers, but also take us into the worlds of these women, into the hearts and minds of these women, into their personal, intimate lives, and tell us of their real lived experiences.
Thank you, Mealy.
So at her session yesterday on the front lawn, Margaret Atwood was challenged by a gentleman in the audience who wanted her to answer the question, why did she think feminism had failed? She responded by saying feminism has so far seen 3 phases. The first was giving women the vote. The second was giving women equal opportunity to education and employment. And the third was the fight against violence against women. And that is the phase we're at now. When Mealy came to me wanting to put together an anthology of Indian women writers so that their work could reach an international readership, which she really felt wasn't happening yet, or certainly not sufficiently, we were originally going to put a book together of fiction and poetry. But as we were discussing the very, very hot and zeitgeist issue of safety for women in India, we really did want to put those 2 things together, showcasing the talents of Indian women writers while simultaneously addressing the issues of safety and all the conditions that Indian women do face on a daily basis.
Sorry, I'll use this mic. I think people are having trouble hearing at the back. So the seed for this book, in a sense, was the horror stories we were hearing about violence against women in India. And to that end, we approached Leela Seth, who was the first woman judge in the Delhi High Court and the first woman to become Chief Justice of a state high court in India. Now, Leela Seth was invited after the 2012 bus rape incident to be one of 3 members of the Justice Verma Committee, which was appointed by the Indian government to address issues of safety for women and amend the laws in order to better protect women. So Leela Seth has written the prologue to this book. She has recounted the process of being on the Justice Verma Committee, what was involved, and how she felt about the process as it was going along, as those laws were being changed. Now that makes this sound like a very sober book, which it isn't. That prologue by Leela Seth is in a way the underpinning for the rest of the book because it sets the legal framework which affects, of course, every woman in India. But subsequently, we appealed to 18 women writers across the country who live in different parts of the country in very different sets of circumstances and whom we felt, as a collective, would represent a good range of interesting and insightful and telling details about the sorts of lives Indian women lead today. And of course, we did appeal to those writers that we felt were the finest Indian women writing in the country today. So first, I'd really like to thank all of the contributors for this anthology. Asking them to write personal narratives was not necessarily simple for everyone involved. Even though the authors are very keen to be part of this anthology, they felt it would address very important issues and all wanted to be a part of it immediately. When it came to writing from the self, I think more courage was required in some circumstances than they had originally anticipated. The beauty, though, of sharing these personal narratives, I think, is that when somebody opens up in confidence and in a spirit of trust and shares her personal story, an emotional connection is made with the reader and a kind of magic happens where a really deeper understanding is forged and strangers become friends in a sense and divisions fall away. That is really part of the intention of this book. Now I'm going to stop talking and invite Tiska Chopra to the stage. Tiska is going to release the book. She probably needs no introduction, but I shall give you a brief one. Tiska is a Bollywood actress known for her unconventional roles. She has received national and international awards for her performances, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her with us. Tiska wrote a contribution for the book called Cast Away, about what it's like for an actress in Bollywood to be on the casting couch. And it's a very moving but simultaneously very funny contribution to the book. Tiska, please come and join us.
Thank you, Catriona. Good evening. Can you hear me back there? Yes? Okay, so I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. Have you heard of this movie called Bazigarni? Have you heard of Heroine number one? No? Have you heard of Anita, Aisha, and Angelina, like Amar Akbar Anthony? No, you haven't. Because these films haven't been made. You know? So, somebody once said that women may not be any better than men, but then certainly no worse. Then where are our stories? I'm not talking about your chiclet, I want to get married tomorrow, my band, baja, barat kind of stories, not your styrofoam kind of stuff. I'm talking about the meat and potatoes kind of stories. Where are they? The stories of real Indian women. We're some 7 million of us. We're one half of one of the largest populations of the world. But where are our stories? Who tells our stories? Why are there not enough of stories, not just in film, but in literature everywhere? And today, fortunately, that's just not a rhetorical question. We have the answer. You already know the answer. Catriona spoke about that. This book, Walking Towards Ourselves, is 12 real women, incredible women, 11 incredible women and me. So all of us talking about our real life dealings with India and what it means to be a woman today. If 300 or 400 years down the line, someone were to understand authentically what it means to be a Southeast Asian woman, this book, Walking Towards Ourselves, would be their reference material, not the other chiclet stuff that you're reading. So ladies and gentlemen, this book is the hard work of Catriona, I met her today for the first time. We've done a book together, but I met her today. So everything's happened on email. Incredible woman power here. Catriona, Mealy, Hardy Grant, Kartika, Mansi, HarperCollins, Namita Gokhale for her foreword, and of course, the wonderful, wonderful, incredible authors who very bravely shared their personal stories. Hand back to Catriona, who will then tell us more.
Thank you, Tiska. So it's time for our first reading. We're going to do very brief readings because of time constrictions. And we would have loved to have invited everybody, but we just simply were not able to. It was more or less a case of drawing straws. Anjum Hassan is the first to read. Anjum writes poetry and fiction. Her books have been nominated for various awards, including the Man Asian Literary Prize, the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, the Hindu Best Fiction Award, and the Crossword Fiction Prize. In the anthology, Anjum's contribution is called Homegirl.
When Catriona invited me to contribute to this anthology, I decided not to tell a personal story, but instead to tell the story of a young woman I know. She's a government social worker, lives in a small town in Karnataka, and violence against women and violence against men is part of her daily life. And her work is to care for abused women and abandoned girls. And it is the attitude with which she does this that most attracted me to her. I had extended conversations with Manjula over the space of 6 months, observing her at work and at home, traveling with her and meeting her family. So I'm going to start reading from the beginning of the piece. Manjula wakes at dawn to a torrent on the roof, feeling the small body thrashing next to her. 4-year-old Rani has been running a temperature the last 2 days. Manjula gives the girl a drink of water, then pats her warm body back to sleep. It's been a monsoon-soaked August, and most of the 30-odd girls at this government-run home have coughs and colds. They walk to and from school, their slippered feet sloshing in puddles and rain lashing at their bare legs. They've lined up twice in the past week for the visiting doctor. The youngest of the lot of these girls is the little girl in bed, who's ravenous for affection. This scrawny thing and her solemn elder sister were abandoned by their housemaid mother after their father died and she remarried. Their mother's brother took them in for a couple of years, but he's getting married soon too, so he decided to drop them at the home. Their mother hasn't been to visit since. The sisters look set to spend their childhood here. Still, in not having known life-altering catastrophe, they are better off than many of their contemporaries, whose curriculum vitae feature mostly horror. Father burnt mother to death in a fit of rage and went to jail, daughters sent here. Parents alcoholics and beaters, daughters rescued and brought here. Father married another woman, mother allowed daughter to be repeatedly raped for money, girl brought here by the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjum. I'll now call Urvashi Butalia to the lectern. Urvashi was co-founder of Kali for Women, India's first feminist publishing house, and is now director of Zuban. She has had a long involvement with the women's movement in India, and her contribution to the book is called Oxygen.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? I have never seen so many people at a book launch. Tell me that you're here to listen to us and you're not just saving seats for the next session. But the good news is, if you are saving seats for the next session, the subject we're talking about, inequality, is the same. So it will just be a continuation of that, except that I don't know how much Monsieur Piketty will talk about gender. So I'm going to read a short bit about the birth of the first feminist publishing house in India called Kali for Women, something in which I was involved. Kali for Women, the feminist publishing house that emerged out of my engagement with the women's movement and my involvement in publishing, was formed with a publishing colleague called Ritu Menon. It was a strange sort of hybrid, part NGO working on a non-profit basis. We had no money, so this was the only choice available, and part business, producing books in the business world and selling them to produce more and to stay alive. It was the women's movement that gave birth to us. I suppose today one would use the term incubated, and it was the movement that sustained us. Female activists wrote for us, they bought our books, they encouraged us, and with this we survived, slowly, steadily bringing Indian women's voices to the mainstream. Looking back now, I can't think of a moment that was not exciting or challenging. We were so happy. We were doing something we loved and believed in, and we had so much support from other feminists, from family, from friends. Oddly enough, our colleagues in publishing, all men, were not against what we were doing, but they were a bit skeptical. Women, do they write? Do they read? Who will buy your books? And printers and paper merchants and typesetters and block makers, at the time, all these were individual, separate services. They did not know what to make of us. But the feminists, they bought every book we published, going to bookshops and demanding, when is the next Kali book coming out? And they wrote for us. They pointed us towards possible sources of money. Often they'd turn up at our office to chat, and ideas for new books would grow out of these informal conversations. Basically, every turn we took, they were there, smiling, nodding, pushing, encouraging. I'm not sure what we would have done without them. Thank you.
Thank you, Urvashi. I'll now invite Anita Agnihotri to the lectern. Anita writes in Bengali and has authored 40 books of poetry and prose. The lives of silent, vulnerable, and marginalized people lie at the core of her writing, and her contribution in walking towards ourselves is called The Village Without Men.
Namaskar. My story, the story I contributed for this book, is a story from Sundarbans. It is from a village where all the men have migrated, and it is a story of a woman called Taramoni. It is written in Bengali and translated for the volume. It's a fragile eco-sensitive zone, as you know, Sundarbans, south of West Bengal, where people struggle every day to make both ends meet. And since there is hardly any livelihood, men have to migrate, leaving the women back at home for handling everything from food procurement to bringing up the children. I'm reading from the piece. Taramani had two sons. One was 20 and the other 18. They too had left the village after Ayla. Ayla is the name of a hurricane that took place in Sundarbans in 2009. I asked her where the sons had gone. I don't know, she said. The contractor who gave them work had said he would let us know, but he hasn't been to the village since then. I don't know their address either, nor did they say when they would return. Have they sent any money through money orders? No. Taramani shook her head. They are young. They haven't learned any trade. They will ruin their health if they are working at a brick kiln. And if Taramani fell silent, I knew the apprehension that had cast a shadow over her, the fear that the boys would come back with disease or disabilities. As their mother, she could not express her inner fears. No woman who had to guard her house in a village of no men could sleep well, and the dark, deep circles under Taramani's eyes indicated that she had not slept peacefully for many nights. Didi, do you have sleeping pills? Will you give me some? Taramani held out her hand to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. And Salma, please come to the lectern. Salma is a writer of Tamil poetry and fiction whose work speaks about the taboo areas of traditional women's experience. Her novel, The Hour Past Midnight, which revolved around the lives of women in a Muslim community of rural Tamil Nadu, helped Salma make her mark as a writer in India and abroad. Her contribution is called Beyond Memories.
I wrote my own story, but now so many women are having same kind of lifestyle in India. This book is great effort. I want to say thanks to Namita and Catriona and Copper Collins. It was during that phase of my life when I was engulfed by solitude that I began to write poems to transcribe my feelings. My poems were full of questions and critiques about how the lone difference of gender was used to strangle women, rather than expressing a young woman's typical feelings of joy and celebration. My poems spoke of grief and loneliness. I started writing them on postcards and with the help of a male cousin, sending them to publishers whose addresses I found in the magazines I had read. Eventually, Little Magazine published my poem, Breathing. When the postman delivered the magazine to my home, it created a furor within my family and my village. My work was condemned for two reasons. First, a Muslim woman who had to keep her identity hidden and lead a cloistered life inside her home was expressing herself through poetry. Second, the poems were critical of our narrow, closed society. Instead of feeling anger or sadness about the savage comments people made about me, I felt a profound joy from knowing that my poems could shake up my society, at least to a small extent. Thank you very much.
Festival director Namita Gokhale wrote the foreword to the book, and she's going to say a few words, and then we will release the book. Thank you, Salma.
यहाँ today we have Stree Shakti and we have Sahitya Shakti both with us. So it's really brilliant. This book, Walking Towards Ourselves, has contributions from writers with a range of distinct and very strongly individual voices. Many of them are friends, others are writers who I've read and admired. All these stories resist easy stereotypes. They tell of the women around them or of themselves with direct and compelling truth-telling. The essays and musings in this collection, wise, anguished, or rebellious as they may be, because the sheer diversity of voices with everybody so different and yet so with some threads of complete cohesion within the stories, brings alive a revelatory panorama of struggle and survival, of sorority and of resistance. These are truly transformative tales. They carry the texture and nuance of being an Indian and of being woman within them. And we are each other's stories, and these are all our collective stories in this book. So thank you, all of you, and all of you. Thank you.
I'm going to invite some more of the contributors up onto the stage and we'll release the book and do the photo opportunity. Nirupama Dutt. Nirupama is a poet, journalist and translator, as well as an art, literary and film critic. She writes in English, Punjabi and occasionally in Hindi, and her contribution to Walking Towards Ourselves is called Two Sisters, Two Lives. Annie Zaidi is a writer of fiction, non-fiction, poetry and scripts. She is the author of Gulab, Love Stories numbers 1 to 11 and Known Turf, which was shortlisted for the prestigious Crossword Prize. Her contribution is called Over My Shoulder. And Rosalind de Mello, please come up. Rosalind is a widely published freelance art writer based in New Delhi. Her memoir, which was released just last month, I think, or December, was published by HarperCollins in late 2015. Her contribution is called Black and explores skin color. I'm not sure Jaipur Lit Fest has ever had so many women on stage at once.
I want a special clap for Catriona because she has held the front stage together. How many years now? 7 years, front lawns, Catriona, now doing this book.
I like to joke with Mealy that she looks Indian but is Australian on the inside. I look Australian but I'm Indian on the inside. Just to conclude, and we are out of time, I would like to invite Mansi Subramaniam from HarperCollins. She is a commissioning editor at HarperCollins and the publisher of this book in India, and she really leapt on this idea the moment she heard about it at Sydney Writers' Festival in May last year. Mansi.
Well, I won't say very much because you've heard such wonderful, candid stories from everyone here. But I do want to say thank you to all of you. There are other contributors in the book, 18 in total, and they're all absolutely wonderful. I wish they could all be here. Thank you, Namita, for giving us this fantastic stage. Thank you to the Jaipur Literature Festival. Thank you, Catriona. This book happened because of a completely unplanned and excited conversation that Mealy and I had very briefly at the Sydney Writers' Festival last year, and I'm so glad that it's here. Thank you all for coming. This morning, my colleagues and I were debating the wisdom of referring to something like this as a book launch. It sounds like you're sending something up into aerospace, but I really feel after this that we have actually launched something very special, a set of ideas, and I hope you will all walk towards yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening so attentively in such a crowded space, and I know you're all very, very keen for the next session. So I'm going to put my other hat back on and announce what's going on next, which is The Politics of Inequality with Thomas Piketty, introduced by Mihir S. Sharma, will go on in just a moment.